Welcome everybody to the latest edition of the Integrated Reporting U.S. Community Monthly Program. I'm here with Bob Lux, the U.S. lead for the Integrated Reporting Council, and our guest today is Mike Krzus, who is has been involved in this movement for so many years in so many different forms. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Mary, and Bob, I know you're out there somewhere. Thank you for the kind invitation.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Fascinating stuff.
And you and I have been doing this for a long time. I think neither one of us had any gray when we started.
That's right. Wait, I think we're just teenagers, weren't we?
Yes.
So, Mike, the reason we wanted to invite you here today is that you and Bob Eccles recently published a paper, and we'll switch and share that paper in a few minutes. Right. But where you did a little experiment, and you used ExxonMobil as an example. And if you don't mind, I'll just let you jump in and start explaining just kind of the background of the experiment, what you did, and then when you're ready, then we'll switch over and I'll share the screen and we can show people the little checklist that you had in the paper.
Perfect. Well, actually, the experiment began just about 2 months ago. Bob Eccles was in Chicago. He was speaking. We decided to get together for part of an afternoon and have dinner, and we talked about integrated reporting, and particularly integrated reporting in the U.S. And the conclusion that all of us, anyone who's participating on this community webinar knows, integrated reporting is a difficult thing to do in the United States. It's a difficult sell. And the proof of that is just over the weekend, I looked at the community website and I saw that there are 21 companies publishing an integrated report. And I realized that not every one of those was a listed company, be it on NYSE or on NASDAQ. But it's still 21. And to put that in some kind of perspective, there are approximately 4,300 U.S. companies listed on the New York Exchange or on NASDAQ. And when you do the math, that says that less than 0.5% of the public companies in the U.S. are doing integrated reporting. And that was really underlying a lot of the conversation that Bob and I had last February. So we asked the question that's been asked a million times, why is it so hard? I did some Google searches. I was looking for various combinations of challenges to integrated reporting, complexity of integrated reporting, cost of preparing an integrated report. And what I found is that there is no, what I'll call it, academic or peer review quality research out there. There are some op-ed kind of pieces that talk about principally the benefits and the challenges, but nobody's quoting what really happened. So went back to sort of 3 of the old favorites that everybody on this webinar, as well as Eccles and I, have heard over time. And we find that integrated reporting is thought to be too complex, too costly, and it exposes companies to litigation risk. And that generally means a couple of things. In terms of complexity, the large global players say, well, they're too diverse. Their operations are spread out all over the world. It's really difficult to pull together the information that's required for an integrated report. On the other side of the coin are small and mid-cap companies. And they tend to say, well, the framework it's complex, it's complicated, the processes are too involved, and we just don't have the financial or human resources to do it. And then the arguments related to complexity drive the arguments about cost. And it sort of gets summed up as follows. Companies already doing a 10K, quarterly filings, a proxy statement, a glossy type annual report. They're doing a sustainability report by some name or another. They're spending millions, so why do they want to do an integrated report? Too costly. And then in terms of litigation risk, it's sort of the myth is that too much disclosure can sometimes contribute to litigation risk. And I think some of those concerns are really wrapped up in the idea that the integrated report, because it focuses on medium and long-term value creation, that makes people nervous. They say that that kind of information exposes the company to more litigation risk. So we walked away from that dinner table with the idea for an experiment. And there were a number of reasons, but it really boils down to two questions we wanted to ask. To what extent does the information necessary to do an integrated report already exist in the public domain? And if that information is available, then how difficult is it to build an integrated report? And the last piece before we get into the table and start talking about the methodology is the selection of ExxonMobil. And the reason for ExxonMobil actually goes back to a prior piece of research that Bob Eccles and I did. December of last year, we did a piece that explored the TCFD recommendations, which were made in June of 2017. And we said, let's look at the 2016 10K and sustainability report for 15 of the largest oil and gas companies in the world. What were they disclosing before the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures published their recommendations? And what we found is actually they're not doing perfectly, but many companies are taking steps towards already having met those requirements before they were published. One of the companies that has extensive reporting is ExxonMobil. And since Bob Eccles and I were really thinking about this in terms of integrated reporting in the United States, we said, well, we're familiar with ExxonMobil. We know they have a lot of information in the public domain. Let's see what we can do with ExxonMobil. So now to the methodology, and you can put up the paper and start with ExxonMobil's information. And then that will get me to the report content. We looked at 7 different reports. They do a citizenship report, a financial and operating review, a summary annual report, 10K proxy statement, a separate compensation overview. And because we started this project in March, they had published a 2018 energy and carbon summary, or an outlook on energy usage. So the first step, having downloaded all of that information, was to create a template for organizing it into what we hope would become an integrated report. So the first column, the column on the far left, the core elements of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And what we wanted to do is use that as sort of the overarching organization for a table of contents. And our rationale was really about the flexibility of integrated reporting and the integrated reporting framework. We wanted to explore whether or not a company could use an integrated report as a vehicle for disclosing or meeting the recommendations of the TCFD. And we went down that path because the recommendations themselves say companies should publish that information in a financial filing. So we know that in the US, companies are going to be reluctant to put that information in a financial filing until they really are comfortable with the quality of the data. Controls are in place, the processes are sound. So that's not necessarily going to happen overnight for specific climate-related risks. So we said, well, why not try it on an integrated report? It's not a filed document. And until controls and processes catch up to the level of Sarbanes-Oxley controls for financial information, let's see if the integrated reporting works. So that's the reason why you see governance and strategy and the other elements in that left-hand column. The second column, the center column, 10 elements of a long-term strategy, that actually comes from a document that was published about 2 years ago now by an organization called FCLT Global. And this was part of a paper that was written by 3 McKinsey partners. And what they were exploring is, how do we overcome the challenge of short-term thinking in the capital markets? And based on their research, they developed a little matrix and said, well, these are the 10 elements of a long-term strategy. And these are the things that long-term focused investors want to see. So that also brought up for Bob Eccles and me the idea of, well, we know that the integrated reporting framework is focused on short, medium, and long-term value creation. So how do we organize it? One of the issues we sometimes hear from integrated reporting or about integrated reporting is, well, it's a principles-based framework. How do we organize an integrated report? What does it look like? So the point we were trying to prove by organizing under these 10 elements is, here's a way to do it. Here's a way to wrap up your discussion of how you create value as an organization. And then the last piece, the third column, is the framework itself, the IR framework. And this was actually based on some work I did literally a year ago, March of 2017. And I created a first draft of a map to take the framework and populate it under each of the elements of the long-term strategy. And in that last column, you'll see that I reference specific content elements and guiding principles, identify the paragraph number that is related to, not always incredibly specific, not always you got to do this, you've got to do that. It's a principles-based framework, but it directly relates. As you scroll down, for example, right now at the top of the page, strategy, long-term strategic goals, and that says long-term strategy element number 5 in the middle column. Well, the reference that made the most sense from our perspective was the IR framework content element, strategy and resource allocation. There's the paragraphs. So with this document, we had a way to organize the Exxon information, starting with the far left-hand column and making then the middle column really the table of contents where all of the IR framework information would be housed. So that's where the real work began, where we started to read and then do cut and paste exercises to fill things in. And the initial round was literally largely a lot of cut and paste. And once we had something, including a ton of cut and paste graphics, we went back and said, it's time to edit this. Let's eliminate some, but we know we didn't eliminate all of the duplicated information. The graphics made the document so heavy in terms of size, we had trouble just sharing it with each other. So we recreated many of the graphics as text, just to make this easy to, I won't say easy to read, I will say easy to download and easy to share. So
I'll just jump in, Mike. I think we agreed we're not going to like go through the whole report, but you know, as you said, you know, people that want to look at it can see it, but basically everything in here came out of the public domain. And so,
yeah, I guess if we have just a couple of minutes, I'll just give you a high level analysis of what we think the key findings were. and then we can dive into questions or back and forth, however would work.
Sure. So I'm going to stop sharing the report, and if that's okay.
Sure.
And bring you back up.
I've been here all along.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. With publicly available information, we created what we would call a decent. And there was some thought of it going into that word decent, but it was a decent 40-page integrated report. Our observation is if somebody did this as a first integrated report, would it win a Corporate Knights Award? No. But would people say it's a pretty good first effort? And that's really the level of, I'll call it excellence, if you were, that we were looking for. Does it pass muster as an integrated report? 40 pages. So we think that what we did there is challenge the assertion that integrated reporting demands complex business processes. You can see me on the screen. An old gray beard did this and created a 40-page report. Bob and I spent approximately 40 hours with content development, review, and editing to get to the final version that we uploaded to SSRN. Again, if it took us 40 hours with no expertise in the oil and gas industry, and we had no contact with ExxonMobil, how costly can it be for any team? And it's unfair in some way to pick on ExxonMobil, but that happens to be the example. But if it took us 40 hours, how hard can it be for a Fortune 500 company to create an integrated report? And then the last piece, just to reiterate, every word in that document is from an ExxonMobil report or the ExxonMobil website. It's in the public domain. So the question becomes, how much increased litigation risk is there if this is already freely available on Exxon's website or on other internet sites? So we think we've at least made a first step towards overcoming some of the myths about complexity and cost and litigation risk. And we also think, very importantly, we've created, something that will hopefully get companies thinking about how do you communicate your long-term strategy and stop thinking about integrated reporting as, oh, it's just another report. No, it's a way to talk about how you are going to create value, or at least attempt to create that value, and how you see the world of risks over the next 5, 6, 7 years.
Well, that was a great introduction, Mike. And so what we're going to do now is thank you, and we're going to close the video and welcome people that are watching the video to come to our next program live.